June 14, 1817, began with a lie folded small enough to hide between the pages of a prayer book. At Whitebarrow House in Hampshire, the household had been awake since dawn. Footmen moved polished silver through corridors scented with beeswax and summer flowers. A carriage rolled across the gravel drive. Somewhere below, a door opened, closed, and opened again, as guests were received for the marriage of Miss Clementina Bellinger to Stephen Massingham, 9th Duke of Massingham, in the bridal chamber above the east lawn. Clementina sat before a tall mirror, while Mrs. Ellison adjusted the narrow fall of her veil. She was 31 years old enough to have survived, being overlooked without becoming bitter, and old enough to know that admiration was not the same as kindness. Her ivory silk gown was elegant without extravagance. On the dressing table, beside her gloves, lay the ivory-bound prayer book that had belonged to her mother. Its clasp was delicate, slightly stiff with age, and worn smooth where another woman's fingers had opened it over many years. Clementina had intended to carry it to the chapel because it was the one thing in the room that had not been chosen for her. Mrs. Ellison stepped back. "You are pale." Clementina looked at her reflection. "I have been pale for 31 years. It would be unsettling to change now." Mrs. Ellison did not smile. She had been Clementina's companion long enough to recognize humor used as a curtain. "Are you afraid?" Clementina lowered her eyes to the prayer book. "I am not afraid of him. That isn't quite what I asked." No, it was not. Stephen Massingham had never frightened her. He was powerful, certainly. At 38, he had inherited a dukedom, estates, political obligations, and the habit of being obeyed before he had learned how much silence could conceal. Yet in the 4 months of their courtship, Clementina had seen no cruelty in him. Their engagement had begun as sensible duty. He needed a wife capable of navigating rank without being consumed by it. Clementina needed stability after years of family uncertainty, but something had changed between the first formal calls and the last quiet conversations. He listened when she spoke of tenant schools. He remembered what she said about accounts. Once, in a crowded drawing room, she had watched him ignore 3 louder women to ask whether she had finished the argument she had begun before being interrupted. That small act had remained with her longer than it should have. Mrs. Ellison touched her shoulder. "Then what are you afraid of?" A knock came before Clementina could answer. The door opened only after permission, and a maid announced Mr. Anthony Bellinger. Mrs. Ellison's expression tightened. Anthony entered with the composed assurance of a man who had spent years being welcomed, because refusing him would have been inconvenient. At 44, he carried himself with quiet respectability. His dark coat was immaculate. His manner was restrained. Nothing in his appearance suggested danger. That was one reason Clementina had believed him for so long. "Cousin," he said, "you look very well. I had begun to suspect no one would allow me to forget that today. A wedding day deserves ceremony. So I am told." Anthony glanced at Mrs. Ellison. "I need a private word." Mrs. Ellison did not move. Clementina saw the faint impatience in Anthony's eyes. "Mrs. Ellison remains." Anthony paused. "This concerns the late Mr. Bellinger, her father, dead nearly 3 years, yet still capable of entering rooms through the mouths of living men." Clementina felt something tighten beneath her ribs. "Then she remains," she said. Anthony considered refusing. He did not. Instead, he reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded cream paper no larger than his palm. "I had hoped this would not be necessary." Clementina looked at the paper without taking it. "What is it?" a matter of family honor. The phrase had ruled much of her life. Family honor, her father's name, the Bellinger reputation. Each had been offered as a reason why discomfort should be endured quietly. Anthony extended the note. "Read it." Clementina took it. The paper was warm from his coat. Mrs. Ellison stepped closer, but did not look over her shoulder. Clementina unfolded the sheet. The message was brief. "If you fail to complete the marriage today, the papers concerning your father's fraudulent debts will be placed before men who will not protect his name." Clementina read the sentence twice. Below it, another line had been added. "Say yes, and the matter ends. Refuse, and the truth becomes public." She lifted her eyes. "What papers?" Anthony's expression remained calm. "The same, obligations I have been trying to settle since your father's death. You said those matters were being resolved. Some were, and the others? More serious. Why have I not seen the originals?" A flicker crossed his face. "Because grief has already taken enough from you." Clementina folded the note once, then opened it again. "Do not call ignorance a kindness, Mrs." Ellison drew a quiet breath. Anthony's voice cooled. "You misunderstand the situation. Then explain it. Certain payments must be made. Certain accounts must be stabilized. Once you are Duchess of Massingham, arrangements become possible that are not possible now." Clementina stared at him. "What arrangements? Marriage settlements, future allowances, consolidation of obligations, the sort of matters gentlemen manage without burdening women with unnecessary detail. My father's alleged fraud is an unnecessary detail. Your father's name is the point." There it was, the old weapon, polished and offered as duty. Clementina's father had loved her in the limited way of a man who believed protection meant deciding which truths women could bear. Anthony had inherited that habit and sharpened it. "Does His Grace know about these debts?" she asked. "No." The answer came too quickly. "Why not?" "Because he does not need to. He is about to marry me." "Exactly." Anthony took one step closer. Mrs. Ellison shifted immediately, placing herself slightly nearer to Clementina. Anthony noticed and stopped. "The marriage must proceed," he said. "Once it does, we can prevent unnecessary scandal. Your father's reputation can remain untouched. Your future will be secure. Everyone benefits." Clementina looked down at the note. For the good of everyone concerned. It was the sort of argument that always seemed to require one person to pay more than the rest. "And if I refuse?" Anthony's gaze did not waver. "Then the papers are released." "To whom?" "Men who will investigate without sentiment." "Are the papers genuine?" For the first time, silence opened between them. Anthony answered carefully. "There are signatures, there are accounts. There are transactions that will be difficult to explain." That was not yes. Clementina noticed. She also noticed that he had not answered her first question directly. She folded the paper along its existing crease. "You expect me to stand before the Duke in less than half an hour and make a lifelong vow because you have shown me one anonymous threat. I expect you to behave sensibly. Whose hand wrote this? Does it matter? Yes, not today." Anthony's control slipped just enough for impatience to show. "One word, Clementina. That is all. You have been prepared for this marriage for months. You respect the Duke. He respects you. Say yes, and the matter ends. One word, as though a vow could be separated from the woman who spoke it." Clementina looked toward the window. Beyond the lawns, the private chapel roof rose above the trees. Guests were already seated there. Stephen would be waiting. She thought of his letters, his measured questions, the rare dry humor that appeared when no one expected it. She had believed herself fortunate. Perhaps she still was. That was what made the fear worse. She did not know whether she wanted to marry him. She knew only that until this moment she had believed the answer belonged to her. Anthony held out one hand. "Give me the note." Clementina closed her fingers around it. "No," his eyes hardened. "It is not wise to carry such a thing into the chapel." Then perhaps it was not wise to bring it to my room. She turned to the dressing table, opened her mother's ivory prayer book, and placed the folded note between 2 pages. Anthony watched. "Good," he said. Clementina closed the book. "I did not say I agreed with you." "You don't need to agree with me. You only need to understand what happens if you refuse." He bowed with precise courtesy and left. The door closed. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Mrs. Ellison crossed the room. "You do not have to go." Clementina rested both hands on the prayer book. "They are waiting." That is not the same thing. No, it was not. Yet all her life, waiting rooms full of other people had felt like commands. She stood. Mrs. Ellison helped arrange the veil. Clementina took the prayer book in both hands. The hidden note seemed heavier than paper should feel. When they entered the corridor, the house had changed. Every servant who bowed seemed to know where she was going. Every open door seemed to point toward the chapel. Outside, sunlight lay across the gravel path. Bells began to ring. Clementina walked beside Mrs. Ellison through the garden and toward the waiting congregation. She did not stumble. She did not weep. Dignity had been taught to her too thoroughly for that, but as the chapel doors opened, one thought entered her mind and refused to leave. Perhaps dignity had always been praised because it made silence easier for other people. Stephen stood at the altar. The moment he saw her, his expression changed. Only slightly. No one else would have noticed. Clementina did. His attention sharpened. She knew what he saw. Her face was pale. Her hands held the prayer book too tightly. She did not meet his eyes. The music ended. Mrs. Ellison stepped away. Clementina took her place beside Stephen. The priest began. Words moved through the chapel. Duty, witness, marriage, consent. Anthony stood among the guests, watching. Clementina felt the folded note hidden between the pages beneath her fingers. Then came the question, the one everyone had gathered to hear her answer. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For one suspended second, no one in the chapel moved. The priest waited with the patience of a man accustomed to nervous brides. A faint rustle passed through the pews. Clementina heard it as though from a great distance. Her heart was beating too quickly, but the rest of her seemed frozen. The folded threat lay hidden inside the ivory prayer book beneath her hands. Anthony was somewhere behind her. Stephen stood beside her. The priest asked the question again, more gently this time. Clementina drew breath. She knew the word. She had known it all morning. One syllable, one answer. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. The silence changed. It was no longer a hesitation that could be politely ignored. It had become something everyone could feel. A woman in the second pew lowered her fan. Someone farther back shifted against the wooden bench. The priest glanced toward Stephen. Clementina kept her eyes fixed on the prayer book, because looking anywhere else felt impossible. Then, behind her and slightly to the left, Anthony whispered, "Answer." The word was quiet enough that most of the chapel did not hear it. Stephen did. His head turned by a fraction. Clementina's fingers tightened around the prayer book. The old clasp pressed into her right palm. She did not feel the sharpness at first. She felt only pressure. The priest began once more. "Miss Bellinger, I must ask you plainly. Do you take His Grace, Stephen Massingham, Duke of Massingham, to be your husband?" Clementina tried. truly tried. Her throat closed around the answer. The clasp bit deeper. A thin line of pain cut through the panic, and then warmth spread beneath her glove. Stephen looked down, his attention fixed on her right hand. A small dark stain had appeared against the pale fabric near the base of her palm. He saw the trembling first, then the blood. Clementina did not. She was still listening to Anthony's whisper in her mind. Answer, as though a vow could be ordered, as though silence were disobedience, as though her father's name were waiting on the other side of one word. Stephen stepped back from the altar. The movement was small, but it broke the ceremony more completely than a shout could have done. The priest stopped speaking. Every face turned toward him. Stephen's voice was calm. There will be no vow today. A collective breath moved through the chapel. Clementina finally looked at him. He was not looking at the guests. He was looking at her. Lady Araminta Hedden rose from the front pew with controlled alarm. Stephen, surely this is unnecessary. The poor woman is overcome by nerves. His gaze did not leave Clementina. Sit down, Aunt. Araminta stiffened. You cannot stop a wedding because a bride loses her voice for half a minute. Stephen turned then. His expression was unreadable, but his tone had sharpened. I can stop my own wedding for any reason I choose. The priest lowered his prayer book. Anthony stepped into the aisle. Your Grace, perhaps Clementina only needs a moment in private. I can assist her. Stephen looked at him. No, Anthony stopped. I am her family, and yet I heard you tell her to answer. The chapel went utterly still. Anthony's face remained composed. I was encouraging her. Were you? Stephen asked. Nothing in his voice rose. That made the question more dangerous. Clementina felt every eye in the room turn toward Anthony, then back toward her. She wanted the floor to open. She wanted the whispers to stop. More than anything, she wanted to understand why Stephen had noticed what no one else had. He stepped closer to her, but not so close that she had to retreat. Miss Bellinger, may I see your hand? She looked down for the first time. The pale glove was marked with a narrow red stain. It is nothing, perhaps. His voice softened. May I see? He did not reach for her. He waited. Clementina loosened her grip on the prayer book and extended her right hand. Only then did Stephen lean closer. He did not remove the glove. He simply looked. You are hurt, only a little. Araminta's voice came from behind him. A pinprick does not explain this spectacle. Stephen straightened. No, it does not. Clementina saw something in his face then, not anger directed at her, something colder, more deliberate. He looked at the priest. The ceremony is ended. The priest nodded slowly. As your Grace wishes. No, Stephen said, as decency requires. He turned to the congregation. The guests stared back at him with the stunned attention of people who had arrived expecting vows and had been given a scandal instead. Stephen spoke clearly enough for every person in the chapel to hear. Miss Bellinger has not refused me. I have stopped the ceremony. If blame is required, place it upon me. The words struck Clementina harder than accusation would have done. He had taken the room's judgment before anyone could push it toward her. Araminta stood rigidly beside the pew. You are sacrificing your reputation over bridal nerves. Stephen looked at her. I am declining to accept a vow from a woman who cannot give it freely. That is not sacrifice. It is the minimum required of any decent man. No one answered. Clementina felt the chapel change around her. The same witnesses who had waited for her to speak were now silent because Stephen had done so. But he had not answered for her. He had only stopped others from deciding what her silence meant. The difference was so unfamiliar that it frightened her almost as much as the threat had. Stephen turned back to her. "Would you like to leave the chapel?" Clementina nodded. "With Mrs. Ellison?" Another nod. "Very well." He gestured toward the side door leading to the vestry. Anthony moved forward again. "I should accompany my cousin." Stephen looked at Clementina instead of answering him. "Do you wish Mr. Bellinger to come with us?" The question reached her slowly. No one had asked what she wanted since Anthony entered the bridal chamber. Clementina looked at her cousin. His expression was calm, but his eyes were not. She thought of the folded paper inside the prayer book. Say yes, and the matter ends. Refuse, and the truth becomes public. Her lips parted. This time, a word came. No. It was barely louder than breath. Yet everyone nearest them heard it. Anthony's face changed by a degree. Stephen did not smile. He did not praise her. He simply nodded. "Then he will not." Anthony's voice hardened. "Clementina, you are distressed." She looked at him. The fear was still there, but something else had appeared beside it. The strange relief of having said one word that belonged entirely to her. "I said no." Stephen opened the side door. Mrs. Ellison came immediately, pale with concern. Together they left the chapel. Behind them, the guests began to murmur, but Stephen closed the door before the sound could follow. The vestry was small and cool, with stone walls, a narrow table, and a single high window. Clementina stood near the table, still holding the prayer book. Mrs. Ellison moved to her side. Stephen remained several feet away. "Mrs. Ellison stays," he said. Clementina looked at him. "Yes, good." He removed his gloves and set them aside, then stopped himself before taking another step. "I will not ask why you could not speak until you are ready to tell me." Clementina stared at him. "You must be angry." "I am." Her breath caught. His expression softened, but only slightly. "Not with you." She looked down. The red mark on her glove had widened. Mrs. Ellison reached for her hand. "We must remove this." Clementina nodded. She tried to set the prayer book on the narrow table, but her fingers had stiffened around it. When she finally released it, the old clasp clicked against the wood. The cover shifted open. Something pale slipped between the pages and fell onto the table. A folded cream note. Clementina stopped breathing. Mrs. Ellison looked at it. Stephen did too. He did not reach for the paper. He did not even move closer. He looked at Clementina and asked quietly, "Do you wish me to read that?" Clementina stared at the folded note as though it had become more dangerous now that someone else could see it. The vestry seemed smaller than before. Mrs. Ellison stood beside her, with one hand still near Clementina's injured right hand. Stephen remained across the narrow table, waiting. He did not reach for the paper. He did not repeat the question. Clementina realized that he was leaving the silence to her, and for once, silence did not feel like a trap. She looked at the note, then at him. "Yes." Stephen's expression did not change. "You wish me to read it?" "Yes." Only then did he move. He crossed the short distance to the table and picked up the folded paper. Clementina watched his hands more than his face. He opened the note carefully, read it once, then a second time. He did not react at first. That restraint frightened her more than anger might have done. At last he folded the paper along its original crease and placed it back on the table. "Who gave you this?" he asked. "Anthony." "When?" "Less than half an hour before the ceremony, Mrs." Ellison's hand closed around the back of a chair. Stephen looked at Clementina. Did he write it? I do not know. Did he say who did? No. Did he explain what papers it referred to? Clementina drew a slow breath. "He has spoken to me before about debts connected to my father. He said some had been settled and others remained. Did you see the original documents? No? Copies?" Some papers, I cannot say whether they were true copies. Stephen nodded once, as though storing each distinction. Clementina noticed that he did not make the accusation for her. He did not say Anthony had forged anything. He only asked what she knew. What did Mr. Bellinger say would happen after the marriage? That certain arrangements would become possible. What arrangements? Marriage settlements, future allowances, consolidation of obligations. Stephen's face hardened. Did he tell you that I had agreed to any such use of my finances? No. Did he imply that I knew of the debts? He said you did not. He was correct about that. Clementina looked down at her glove. The small stain of blood had darkened. Perhaps there is some misunderstanding. Stephen's gaze moved to the note. Misunderstandings do not usually instruct a woman to say one word under threat of destroying her dead father's name. The truth of it struck harder when spoken by someone else. Clementina felt the old instinct rise. Defend Anthony, defend the family, defend the dead. She had done that for years. He may believe he is protecting the family. Stephen looked at her. Do you? The question was quiet. Clementina did not answer immediately. Mrs. Ellison moved closer and touched the edge of Clementina's glove. Your hand first. Clementina allowed her to remove it. The fabric pulled slightly where blood had dried. Beneath it, a narrow cut crossed the lower part of her right palm. It was not deep, but the skin around it had reddened. Stephen's attention dropped to the wound. May Mrs. Ellison clean that? Clementina almost laughed from surprise. You are asking permission? Yes, for water and linen. Yes, you could simply order it. I could do many things because of my rank. That does not mean I should. Something in Clementina's chest tightened. She looked at Mrs. Ellison. Please. Stephen stepped back while Mrs. Ellison fetched the small basin from the sideboard and dampened a clean cloth. She cleaned the cut gently, then bound Clementina's palm with a narrow strip of linen. Stephen waited without impatience. Only when Mrs. Ellison finished did he look again at the folded note. I would like to keep this. Clementina's eyes went to him. The prayer book? No, the note. He paused. Only if you permit it. She glanced at the ivory-bound book lying open on the table. It had belonged to her mother. The hidden threat was gone now, exposed between them. For one strange second, Clementina felt as though the book itself could breathe again. Why do you want it? She asked. Because someone used it to place pressure upon you before a marriage to me. Because I heard Anthony tell you to answer. Because I intend to understand what happened. And if the papers about my father are real. Stephen did not look away. Then we face what is true. No promise to bury it. No grand assurance that a duke could erase facts because he wished to. Clementina had not expected that answer. She looked again at the note. Keep it. Stephen picked it up. You are certain? Yes. He placed it inside the inner pocket of his coat. The transfer was small and simple. The note no longer belonged to the secrecy Anthony had imposed. It had become evidence. The prayer book remained on the table before Clementina. Stephen looked at it, then back at her. There is something else you need to know. The tone changed the room. Clementina felt Mrs. Ellison turn toward him. What? She asked. Stephen drew a measured breath. 1 week ago, on June 7th, I wrote to you. Clementina frowned. I received no letter from you on June 7th. I know that now. What did you write? His face was composed, but there was something beneath it. Not guilt. Anger, perhaps, directed inward as much as outward. After our last conversation in London, I believed you were troubled. I was tired, perhaps, but you were unlike yourself. Clementina said nothing. She remembered the conversation. Anthony had spoken to her that morning about family obligations. She had gone to meet Stephen afterward and spent most of the visit measuring every word. "What did the letter say?" she asked. Stephen answered carefully that if you had any hesitation about the marriage, the ceremony could be postponed. Clementina stared at him. He continued, "I wrote that no public explanation would be required from you. If blame was necessary, I would accept it. And if you wished to refuse the marriage entirely, you were free to do so." The vestry seemed to tilt around her. "You wrote that?" "Yes, a week ago." "Yes, and sent it to me?" "Yes." Clementina looked at Mrs. Ellison. The older woman shook her head. "I saw no such letter." Clementina looked back at Stephen. "I never received it." "I know." "How?" "Because you looked at me as though I had just told you something impossible." She lowered her gaze. He was right. She had not merely been surprised. She had been wounded by the knowledge. Freedom had existed. It had been written down, sealed, and sent toward her. Yet she had gone to the altar, believing there was no honorable road away from it. "How was it delivered?" she asked. "Through the Bellinger correspondence channel. I believed it the most direct way to reach you while you were staying under family arrangements before the wedding." Clementina's breathing changed. "Anthony controlled much of the family post after my father's death." Stephen nodded. "That occurred to me." She looked at him sharply. "You think he intercepted it. I think we know 3 facts. I wrote the letter. You did not receive it. Anthony controlled much of the correspondence. And you heard him tell me to answer. Yes. Then you do suspect him." "I suspect that there are questions requiring answers." His voice was firm. "But I will not invent proof, because suspicion is convenient." Clementina studied him. That answer mattered. Perhaps more than certainty would have. "I do not know whether Anthony took your letter," she said. "Neither do I. I do not know whether the papers about my father are false." "Neither do I." "Then what do we know?" Stephen looked at her bandaged right hand, then at the prayer book, then finally at her face. "We know you were threatened before the ceremony. We know the threat referred to your father's name. We know a letter offering you complete freedom never reached you. We know Anthony told you to answer when you could not speak." Clementina felt the weight of each fact. "And we know you stopped the wedding." "Yes. Why?" Stephen was silent for a moment, because your silence did not look like consent. No flourish, no claim of heroism. Just that. Clementina looked away. Her eyes burned, but she would not cry. Not because tears were weakness, because she needed to think. "Perhaps I would have said yes without the note," she said. Stephen's expression changed by a fraction. "Perhaps." "You do not believe me. I believe that neither of us should decide now what you might have chosen if someone else had not interfered." The answer landed with painful gentleness. He would not use her uncertainty to claim her. He would not turn possibility into obligation. Clementina placed her uninjured left hand over the closed prayer book. "What happens now? There will be no new wedding date. Society will demand an explanation. Society is often disappointed." A faint, unexpected warmth moved through her. Stephen continued, "There will be no announcement that you were ill. No statement will be issued in your name without your permission. I will send for my solicitor. We will examine the note, the missing letter, and any financial records that can be lawfully obtained." Clementina looked at him. "You say we, if you wish. And if I do not? Then I proceed only with what concerns me directly and leave your affairs untouched." She let that settle. Mrs. Ellison stood quietly beside her. Outside the vestry, the distant murmur of departing guests reached the stone walls. The scandal had already begun. Clementina knew it. Yet for the first time that morning, fear was not the only thing she felt. There was anger now, clarity, and beneath both, the first fragile sense that choice might still be possible. Stephen moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. Clementina waited. He looked at her with an expression so restrained that another person might have missed the emotion in it. I wrote to you, Miss Bellinger. Someone decided you should never know that you were free by the morning of June 15th. White Barrow House had learned how loudly a stopped wedding could echo without anyone raising a voice. The flowers remained in the private chapel, though the candles had been removed. Guest rooms stood half-emptied. Trunks that had been prepared for departure were opened again. Servants crossed the corridors with careful faces and lowered eyes, because a ducal wedding abandoned before the vows had become the sort of event every person wished to understand, and no one dared discuss openly. Clementina woke with her right palm bandaged and sore. The ivory-bound prayer book lay on the bedside table beside her, closed and entirely hers. The threatening note was no longer inside it. Stephen had retained the paper with her permission, and, after leaving the vestry the previous day, had secured it in his locked dispatch box. Nothing else had changed hands. Mrs. Ellison entered carrying chocolate and toast, along with a message written in the Duke's restrained hand. He asked whether Clementina would receive him in the small morning room after breakfast. There was no command in the wording, no assumption. Clementina read it twice. "You may tell him yes," she said. Mrs. Ellison gave her a long look. "You are certain?" Clementina glanced at the white linen around her palm. "No, but I would like answers more than I would like comfort." "That sounds familiar, does it? You have always preferred a difficult truth to an easy silence." Clementina looked toward the prayer book. "I am beginning to wonder whether that is true." Before she could say more, another message arrived. Anthony Bellinger intended to leave White Barrow before noon. "Urgent business," his servant said. Clementina stood at the window and watched his carriage being brought around below. He did not request to see her. That absence hurt less than it clarified. By 11 o'clock, he was gone, travelling toward London with 2 servants and an amount of luggage too small for a long stay. Stephen received Clementina in the morning room with unopened correspondence spread across the writing table. Mrs. Ellison entered with her and remained. Stephen rose immediately. His eyes went first to Clementina's face, then to the bandage around her right hand. "How is it?" "Sore, but hardly dramatic. I will try not to disappoint you by calling for a surgeon." A brief, surprised smile touched Clementina's mouth. It disappeared quickly, but Stephen had seen it. He seemed to take care not to react too strongly. "My solicitor has been summoned from London," he said. "I sent an express rider this morning. I mentioned private correspondence, financial representations, and possible interference requiring immediate examination. Nothing more." "You did not tell him about the wedding?" "Not in writing." "Why?" "Because until I know who has been reading which letters, I do not intend to put unnecessary facts on paper." Clementina looked at him more closely. "You think the problem may extend beyond one missing letter? I think we should find out." He gestured toward the chairs near the table. "Will you sit?" She did. Stephen waited until she had settled before taking his own chair. He had arranged paper, ink, and a blank calendar page between them. "Not sentiments," he said. "Dates." Clementina understood. "Facts before conclusions." "Exactly. They began with the 4 months of their courtship. Stephen asked when letters arrived, how quickly she replied, and whether any messages had seemed unusually brief. Clementina remembered more than she expected. After his second formal call, Stephen had written asking whether she preferred a visit to a picture gallery or a drive in Hyde Park. Clementina had received only a note proposing an hour for the drive. "I thought you had decided not to ask my preference after all," she said. Stephen's brows drew together. "I wrote 2 full sentences on the matter. That sounds extravagant." "For me, certainly." She almost smiled again. Then the pattern grew less amusing. Clementina had once written him at length about a tenant charity supported by her family. Stephen remembered receiving a shortened version that sounded oddly formal. A Monday message had arrived Thursday. One of his prompt replies had reached her 5 days late. Then came the letter about the village school in March. Clementina remembered it because she had believed Stephen regretted writing to her. "You sent 3 lines 4 days later," she said. "I sent 2 pages that evening." Silence settled over the table. Clementina looked down at the blank calendar, which was no longer blank. Dates had begun to gather into a pattern. Not proof, but not nothing. Stephen asked, "Who usually handled your correspondence?" "The Bellinger office received much of it. Anthony said it was easier after my father's death, when creditors, family papers, and estate matters required sorting. And afterward, the arrangement continued." "By your choice?" Clementina hesitated. "By habit." Stephen said nothing. She answered the question beneath his silence. "Perhaps by convenience." "For whom?" She met his eyes. "That is what I would like to know." They moved on. One delayed letter in early April led Mrs. Ellison to speak from her chair by the window. "That was when we were at Hartwell Lodge." Clementina looked toward her. "Yes," Stephen asked. "Hartwell Lodge?" "In Hampshire," Clementina said. "Mrs. Ellison's widowed sister was unwell for a short time. We stayed several days." Mrs. Ellison nodded. "From the 2nd of April through the 5th. Clementina added, "I remember because we returned to London just before another engagement." Stephen marked the date. "April 3rd, then, you were in Hampshire." "Yes. Anyone besides Mrs. Ellison who would remember." Clementina looked faintly amused. Her sister certainly would. There was also a guest book and the carriage account, unless the coachman has decided to become a poet instead of keeping records. Stephen's mouth moved at one corner. "I shall hope he remains practical." The moment passed. Neither of them knew yet that April 3rd would matter. For now, it was only another date among many. By afternoon, they had established enough irregularities to justify questions, but not accusations. Stephen wanted originals where they survived, delivery records, messenger books, and witnesses who had handled private post. Clementina leaned back, tired. "You still suspect Anthony?" "I suspect the threatening note, the missing June 7th letter, the correspondence pattern, and the fact that I heard Anthony tell you to answer." "That is not what I asked." Stephen held her gaze. "Yes, I suspect him. I do not yet have proof." Before Clementina could answer, the door opened after a sharp knock. Lady Araminta entered with a frightened young housemaid beside her. The girl could not have been more than 17. "Stephen," Araminta said, "this cannot wait." Stephen rose. "What has happened?" "Mary Cole has admitted carrying letters from the West Passage yesterday morning. If correspondence has been misplaced, the answer may be standing beside me." The girl's face went white. "I didn't carry Miss Bellinger's private letters, Your Grace. Only household post. Mr. Bellinger's man collected family correspondence through the office arrangements." Araminta's expression hardened. A servant will say whatever saves her position. Clementina stood. The movement pulled at the cut in her right palm, but she ignored it. Then a servant should not lose her position, because accusation is easier than proof. Araminta turned toward her. This is a household matter. It concerns missing letters addressed to me. You are hardly in a position to manage questions of judgment today. Clementina felt the room go still. Yesterday, she might have lowered her eyes. Today, she did not. Yesterday, I was unable to speak. That does not make me incapable of thought. Mary Cole stared at her. Stephen's voice was calm. The girl returns to her duties. No one is dismissed or punished without evidence. Araminta's jaw tightened. You are encouraging disorder? No, I am discouraging convenience. She looked from him to Clementina and seemed to understand, perhaps for the first time, that the stopped wedding had not left Clementina as powerless as society might expect. Then perhaps we should at least control the public explanation, she said. We can say Miss Bellinger became unwell. Clementina answered before Stephen could. No, Araminta looked at her. You would prefer society think you rejected a duke. I would prefer society not be told a lie in my name. Araminta left without another word. Mary Cole was dismissed back to her duties with no punishment. Late the following afternoon, June 16th, an express note arrived from a trusted London correspondent connected to Stephen's legal affairs. It contained no printed scandal sheet, only a warning. Guests returning from Hampshire had already carried the story into London, and a particular version was spreading with remarkable speed. Miss Clementina Bellinger, people were saying, had suffered madness before the altar. Stephen read the note once and handed it to Clementina. She read every line. Her bandaged hand rested beside the paper. I can deny this, Stephen said. Clementina folded the note carefully. Not yet. Why? She looked at him. Because if someone decided so quickly that madness was the story, London should believe. I would like to know what they are trying to make people stop asking. By noon on June 17th, White Barrow House had acquired the strained quiet of a place waiting for facts to arrive. Mr. Halford came shortly after 1 o'clock in a dark travelling coat, dusted from the road, carrying a leather case and the expression of a man who had no intention of being impressed by scandal. Stephen received him first in the library. Clementina joined them later with Mrs. Ellison, her right hand still bandaged, but less sore than the day before. The ivory-bound prayer book remained in her room. The threatening note remained secured in Stephen's locked dispatch box. Nothing had changed hands since the vestry. Mr. Halford rose when she entered. He was in his late 50s, spare in build, exact in manner, and so economical with expression that Clementina immediately trusted him more than she expected to. Miss Bellinger. Mr. Halford. Stephen waited until she had taken a chair before sitting. On the table lay several papers, including Clementina's own written reconstruction of delayed correspondence and the copied summaries Anthony had previously shown her concerning her father's alleged debts. Mr. Halford placed both hands lightly on his leather case. Before we discuss any accounts, His Grace tells me there is one decision that belongs to you. Clementina looked at Stephen. Which decision? Stephen answered. Where you wish to remain while this is examined. His voice was even. You may stay at White Barrow with Mrs. Ellison. You may return to your London residence. Or, if you prefer neither, another household can be arranged under the protection of a lady you trust. Clementina studied him. And what would you prefer? A pause followed. That is not the question. It is still one, I asked. Something like reluctant admiration moved across his face. "I would prefer you to be where you feel safest and least pressured." That is an irritatingly careful answer. "I have had reason to improve." Mr. Halford lowered his eyes to the papers, though Clementina suspected he had missed nothing. She looked toward Mrs. Ellison, then back at Stephen. "I will remain at White Barrow for several days." Stephen nodded. Very well. No gratitude, no relief claimed as entitlement. He simply accepted the choice that mattered. Mr. Halford opened his case. "Then we may begin." He took out a narrow packet of notes. "I should first clarify Mr. Anthony Bellinger's position. He is not sole legal trustee of your settlement interests, Miss Bellinger." Clementina frowned slightly. "No. He has acted for some time as a financial agent and practical controller under delegated authority connected to Bellinger family accounts and certain income streams assigned for your benefit." Which means, it means he has had access. He has directed payments. He has managed correspondence relating to accounts. But his authority is not absolute. If sufficient evidence of misconduct appears, that authority can be suspended. Clementina absorbed this. I had been made to believe he could decide such matters without question. Mr. Halford's expression did not change. Men who benefit from being unquestioned often encourage that impression. Stephen said nothing, but his gaze remained fixed on Clementina. Mr. Halford drew forward one of the copied debt summaries. "You told His Grace that Mr. Bellinger represented these payments as settlements connected to your late father's obligations." "Yes, and you were told this one was paid in October, this in January, and this in March." "Yes. Did you see receipts from named creditors?" "No." "Bank acknowledgements?" "No." The questions were not cruel. That made the answers harder, Mr. Halford turned another sheet toward her. "The figures themselves appear elsewhere." Clementina leaned closer. 3 amounts had been copied into a second column, beside dates connected to income from a trust established for her benefit. She looked at him. "You are saying my money was used." "I am saying same sums appear to have been drawn from income legally assigned for you." "To pay my father's debts?" "Perhaps. You do not believe that." "I do not yet believe anything the records do not support." He tapped one line. "What concerns me is that the descriptions do not match. The creditors named to you are not identified here. Instead, the funds move through categories connected to Bellinger administration and private advances." Clementina looked down at the paper. For years, Anthony had spoken of money in tones of burden and discretion. He had said her father's name required protection. He had said details would only distress her. Each time Clementina asked a question, he had answered with another duty. "He told me every payment was necessary to protect the family name," she said. Mr. Halford nodded. "Then we must discover what the money actually protected." The sentence entered the room quietly and changed it. Clementina felt the old loyalty to her father rise first. Then anger followed, not at him, at the possibility that memory itself had been used as currency. Stephen leaned forward slightly. "How much do we know?" Mr. Halford answered him without softening the truth. "Very little. Enough to justify examination. Not enough to accuse Mr. Bellinger of theft, fraud, or deliberate misappropriation." Clementina looked at him. "Then say what can be said." "The payments deserve explanation. The authority under which they were made deserves examination. The records shown to you appear incomplete, and the timing of your marriage may have been financially useful." Stephen's expression cooled. "Explain." Mr. Halford folded his hands. "A marriage to a duke would not automatically transfer Bellinger obligations to His Grace. But settlement discussions, future allowances, new financial expectations, and a general assumption of ducal solvency could create sufficient movement around the accounts to obscure existing shortages for a time. Clementina felt the room go still, so Anthony may have needed the wedding because it would make missing money harder to see. Mr. Halford looked at her directly. That is possible. Not proven, correct. She nodded once. The distinction mattered. Facts had been denied to her for too long. She would not replace one kind of manipulation with another merely because suspicion now favored her. Stephen glanced toward the bandage around her hand. We can stop. Clementina looked at him. No. You are tired. Yes. Then why continue? Because exhaustion does not make ignorance safer. For a moment, neither of them moved. Mr. Halford lowered his attention to the papers again. Stephen's voice softened. Fair enough. The questioning continued, but only long enough to establish what records were needed next. Original account books, delivery records, correspondence registers, bank entries, names of clerks who handled family post, no dramatic accusation, no convenient confession, only a widening pattern. When Mr. Halford finally closed his case, Clementina looked at the papers and understood that the threat before the wedding had not created the danger. It had merely revealed it. Later, after Mrs. Ellison and Mr. Halford had left the room, Stephen remained by the window while Clementina stood near the table. Her palm had begun to ache again, though the cut itself was healing. There will be no new wedding date, he said. Clementina looked at him. I did not ask. I know. Then why tell me? Because others will. She thought of Araminta. Yes, Stephen continued, there will also be no statement that you were ill. Not from this house, not from me. Even if London prefers that explanation, London prefers many things, including simplicity, especially when truth is inconvenient. Clementina studied him. You are very certain today. About that, yes, and about us. The question escaped before she could reconsider it. Stephen's face changed, not dramatically, only enough for her to see that the answer mattered. No. Clementina looked away. He added, the engagement began as duty. She gave a faint, humorless smile. How romantic. I am trying to be honest, a dangerous experiment. So I have been told. His expression softened. But somewhere between the duty and the arrangements, your intelligence became the first thing I looked for in every room. Clementina turned back toward him. He did not move closer. He did not ask her to answer. The words simply remained between them. That sounds almost like affection, she said. Do not spread it about. I have a reputation. This time she smiled, briefly, truly. The moment ended when a servant announced Lady Araminta. She entered in travelling grey, gloves buttoned, posture immaculate. I am leaving tomorrow morning, she said. Stephen's eyes narrowed slightly. For London, yes, there is no sense remaining here while society invents its own explanations. Clementina said, You warned me that would happen. Araminta looked at her, because it will. Her gaze moved from Clementina to Stephen, and then to the closed leather case Mr. Halford had left behind temporarily for a later interview. You may investigate letters and accounts for as long as you like. London will not wait. Clementina held her gaze. Araminta's voice lowered. Society dislikes a mystery. If you do not give it an explanation, someone else will. Clementina felt no surprise, only clarity. Anthony had left first. Araminta was following. London already had one false story about madness. If Anthony's financial position depended on the marriage, and that marriage had failed, Silence would not protect Clementina now. It would only leave the story empty for someone else to fill. After Araminta left, Stephen looked at her. "You are thinking, so I am. Should I be concerned?" "Probably," he waited. Clementina rested her uninjured hand on the edge of the table. If Anthony needed the wedding to hide shortages, and the wedding failed in front of witnesses, then he has two problems now. Stephen's attention sharpened, the accounts, and me. Outside the windows, the June afternoon remained bright and calm. Inside, Clementina finally understood that the danger had changed shape. Before the ceremony, someone had tried to force her to speak. Now, perhaps, someone would try to make certain no one believed her when she did. Lady Araminta left White Barrow on the morning of June 18th with 3 trunks, a maid, 2 footmen, and the air of a woman departing not from defeat, but from an inconvenience she intended to correct. Clementina watched the carriage disappear beyond the lime trees from an upstairs window. Her right palm no longer required a full bandage, though a narrow strip of linen still protected the healing cut. Mrs. Ellison stood beside her. Neither woman spoke until the wheels could no longer be heard. "She will reach London tomorrow," Mrs. Ellison said. "Yes, and she will speak." Clementina looked toward the empty drive. "She already has." By June 19th, Araminta was in London. By the following day, the first printed accounts began to appear in gossip sheets that were careful enough to avoid direct libel, and bold enough to satisfy every reader who preferred scandal to fact. One version claimed Clementina had collapsed at the altar in a state of feminine disorder. Another suggested the Duke had discovered instability too late to withdraw privately. The cruelest account arrived on June 21st. It implied that Clementina's silence had not been caused by illness at all, but by a secret attachment to another man. No name was given. None was needed. An unnamed lover could be imagined into perfection. Mr. Halford brought the sheet to the morning room and laid it on the table without comment. Stephen stood near the fireplace. Clementina sat with Mrs. Ellison beside her and read the article once, then again. "They are improving," she said. Stephen's expression remained cold. "At what? Efficiency? I would have chosen another word. I am sure you have several. None suitable for Mrs. Ellison." The older woman looked up from her sewing. "Your Grace, I am 70 years old." Stephen inclined his head. "Then I withdraw my concern." Clementina almost smiled, but Mr. Halford had not finished. He opened his case and removed a folded memorandum. "There is more." Stephen's attention sharpened. Clementina set down the gossip sheet. "Of course there is." Mr. Halford looked at her directly. "Selected passages from letters are being shown privately in London drawing rooms." "Whose letters?" "They are represented as yours." The room seemed to contract. Clementina's first sensation was not fear. It was disbelief so complete that her mind became unusually clear. To whom were they written? An unnamed gentleman. How convenient. The passages suggest affection, secrecy, and reluctance to marry His Grace. Stephen's face hardened, but he did not speak over her. Clementina asked, "Have you seen the originals?" "No." "Copies?" "Not yet. Descriptions only, from a source I trust." "Then we know very little." "Exactly." The answer steadied her. Facts before conclusions. She had begun to understand how powerful that discipline could be. Mr. Halford continued. "What I do know is that someone wants the stopped wedding interpreted as proof of hidden romantic deception." Clementina looked at Stephen. "If I had another attachment, I chose a very inefficient way to conceal it." Something moved in his expression. "You chose nothing in that chapel accept not to be forced, and yet London prefers a lover. London prefers a story that does not require it to question respectable men. Mr. Halford gave Stephen a brief look, then returned his attention to Clementina. You may remain at White Barrow while we investigate. It was phrased as an option. Clementina noticed. And if I do, the immediate pressure may lessen. For me, possibly, or for the people telling the story. Mr. Halford did not answer. He did not need to. Stephen moved closer to the table. London is preparing to be unkind. Clementina looked at him. You think I should stay here? He paused. There was the old instinct in him. She saw it. The wish to close a door, post guards outside, and call the result safety. But he did not obey it blindly. I think you should know what awaits you before you decide. That is not the same thing. No. Good. Mrs. Ellison lowered her sewing. Clementina looked again at the printed accusation. A secret lover, madness, deception. Each version required her absence. Each grew stronger in rooms where she could not answer. Anthony had threatened to make her father's name public if she refused the marriage. Now that the wedding had failed, another strategy had appeared. If Clementina could not be forced into silence, perhaps her words could be made unbelievable before she spoke them. I am going to London, she said. Stephen became very still. You are certain? No, the answer surprised him. Clementina continued. But I have spent years believing certainty must come before choice. I no longer think that is true. Mr. Halford's expression softened by a fraction. Stephen asked, when? As soon as it can be arranged properly. June 22nd, he said. Your own carriage, Mrs. Ellison, with you. 2 attendants, horse changes arranged in advance. Clementina lifted one eyebrow. You have thought about this. I think about most things. That has occasionally been the problem. Mr. Halford looked down very quickly. Stephen absorbed the remark without protest. Fair. Clementina glanced at him. The small answer mattered. No defense, no wounded rank. And you? She asked. I will follow separately on June 23rd. Why? Because if we arrive together immediately after a stopped wedding, London will decide we have reconciled in secret, quarreled in public, or eloped from our own scandal. Can one elope from one's own scandal? London would find a way. Mrs. Ellison gave a quiet laugh. The room breathed again. Then Stephen asked, Would you prefer me beside you? Clementina looked at him. The question carried more weight than it should have. She remembered Anthony telling her what she must say. She remembered the chapel. She remembered Stephen asking, before touching her hand, before reading the note, before keeping it. Then she remembered something else. Power did not become harmless merely because it was gentle. It had to keep asking. Not before me, she said. Stephen waited. Beside me. His face changed, not triumph, not possession, recognition. Then beside you. On June 22nd, Clementina left White Barrow under a pale summer sky. Mrs. Ellison sat opposite her in the carriage. 2 attendants travelled with them. The ivory-bound prayer book rested securely among Clementina's personal things. Its clasp remained unrepaired and slightly stiff, but the threat was no longer inside. The original threatening note stayed at White Barrow in Stephen's locked dispatch box until he would carry it with him to London the following day. The journey took most of the day, with planned changes of horses and a halt for refreshment. Clementina watched Hampshire give way to busier roads, then to the denser traffic approaching London. She felt no bravery. Bravery, she was beginning to think, was often only fear that had been denied the final word. By evening, she had reached her own London residence with Mrs. Ellison and her attendants. The house had been reopened in haste after having been closed in expectation of her marriage. Rooms smelled faintly of linen and dusted wood. Candles were lit. Fires were unnecessary in the June warmth. But every sound seemed sharper after the quiet of White Barrow. The next afternoon, June 23rd, Stephen arrived in London separately and sent no assumption of access with him. He wrote first. Clementina received him later with Mrs. Ellison present. He had brought the threatening note from White Barrow and secured it again in his London dispatch box. The ivory prayer book remained with Clementina. Mr. Halford joined them before dusk with new information. The supposed letters were still being shown selectively. No full originals had yet been released for inspection. Then a footman entered, carrying a pale envelope on a silver tray. Clementina recognized the hand before opening it. Lady Araminta Heddon requested the pleasure of Miss Clementina Bellinger's company at a musical evening at Heddon House on June 24th. Mrs. Ellison read the invitation over Clementina's shoulder and looked alarmed. "Surely you are not considering it?" Clementina turned the card over. "That depends. On what? On whether it is an invitation or a stage." Stephen, standing near the window, answered, "It is both." Clementina looked at him. "Then I should like to see who has arranged the scenery. Araminta will not be gentle. Neither were the newspapers. A newspaper cannot watch you react, which is precisely why she wants me in the room." Stephen was silent. Clementina could see the words he did not say. "Do not go. Stay here. Let me handle it." He mastered them before they reached his mouth. Instead, he asked, "Do you want me there?" Clementina looked down at the invitation, then at the faint healing line across her right palm. A week earlier, the idea of entering another room full of witnesses might have frozen her. Now, it sharpened something inside her. "Yes," Stephen nodded. "Then I will be there." Clementina placed the invitation on the table. Somewhere in London, strangers were already discussing a woman they had never understood. Somewhere, letters bearing her supposed affections were being passed from hand to hand. And tomorrow night, the people who expected her to break would finally have to watch her arrive standing. By the evening of June 24th, Heddon House in Mayfair had filled with people who claimed to dislike scandal and had dressed carefully to witness it. The musical program was printed on cream paper. A soprano had been engaged. Candles burned in crystal branches, and the drawing room glittered with silver, silk, and cultivated indifference. Yet Clementina understood, before she had crossed the threshold, that very few guests had come to hear music. Conversation softened as she entered with Mrs. Ellison beside her. Faces turned, then turned away too slowly. A woman near the fireplace stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. An older gentleman bowed with grave courtesy, while his wife looked at Clementina with the avid concern of someone who hoped distress would become visible if observed closely enough. Clementina wore dark blue silk without excessive ornament, no bridal white, no jewels associated with the interrupted ceremony. The cut in her right palm had nearly healed, leaving only a faint, tender line. The ivory-bound prayer book remained safely at her London residence. The original threatening note remained secured in Stephen's London dispatch box. Clementina had brought nothing with her except Mrs. Ellison, her own name, and the decision not to allow other people to explain her before she spoke. Lady Araminta Heddon stood near the pianoforte in silver-grey silk, composed enough to make disapproval appear almost ceremonial. "Miss Bellinger," she said, extending one hand. "How courageous of you to come." Clementina met her gaze. You invited me. A brief pause followed. Of course. Araminta smiled. I merely meant that, after recent events, many women would have preferred seclusion. Many women are not me. Mrs. Ellison's hand shifted lightly against Clementina's sleeve. Not warning, recognition. Across the drawing room, Stephen stood near Mr. Halford. He had arrived before Clementina, but he did not cross the room immediately. His eyes found hers. He waited. Clementina had asked him to stand beside her, not before her. He seemed determined to remember the distinction. The first part of the evening proceeded with a performance by the soprano, followed by a pianoforte piece no one truly heard. Clementina listened anyway. She had decided before arriving that Araminta would not possess every moment merely because she intended to stage one. Applause ended. Servants moved quietly with refreshments. Then the door opened again. Anthony Bellinger entered. Clementina felt the change before she looked toward him. He bowed to Araminta first. She received him with unmistakable familiarity. Then his gaze found Clementina. Concern settled over his features so smoothly that months earlier she might have mistaken it for care. "Cousin," he said, "I had not expected to see you here." "Then the evening has already given you something unexpected." "Several things have done that recently." "So I understand." His expression remained controlled. "I had hoped you would remain somewhere quiet until this unpleasantness passed." "Unpleasantness has shown no intention of passing, merely because I sit quietly." Araminta intervened before Anthony could answer. "Perhaps we should not pretend this is an ordinary evening." The room changed. A servant carrying a tray moved out through the side door. Conversations died one after another. Araminta turned slightly, making certain the most important people present could hear her. "There has been much speculation regarding what occurred at White Barrow. I have resisted speaking because I hoped Miss Bellinger might recover sufficiently to address the matter herself." Clementina looked at her. "I have been speaking since the day after the ceremony." "Not publicly. Perhaps because I did not know my private distress had become a public performance." A few guests lowered their eyes. Araminta's smile tightened. "You mistake concern for cruelty. That mistake has been encouraged before." The silence sharpened. Across the room, Stephen went very still. He did not interrupt. Araminta folded her hands. "The difficulty is that society has been given contradictory impressions. First, that you were unwell. Then that you were frightened. Now there are suggestions that your reluctance to marry His Grace had another cause." Clementina heard a fan snap shut. "Which cause?" she asked. Anthony answered. "A prior attachment, Mrs." Ellison drew breath. Clementina turned toward him. "To whom?" "That has not been established." "Then it is remarkable how confidently people discuss it." Araminta moved toward a small side table. Several folded papers lay beneath a silver paperweight. "The confidence does not come from gossip alone." Clementina looked at the papers. "No." Araminta touched the bundle with 2 fingers. "Mr. Bellinger placed these in my hands yesterday." The words settled quietly, but Clementina felt their importance. Anthony had personally supplied the bundle. Araminta had just said so before witnesses. Clementina did not look at Mr. Halford, though she knew he had heard every word. Anthony's face remained composed. "I had hoped to handle the matter privately, by giving private letters to Lady Araminta." Clementina asked, "By preventing greater humiliation." "Whose?" His eyes narrowed. "Yours." Clementina looked at the bundle again. "You have become very concerned with saving me from embarrassments that seem to grow only after passing through your hands." A murmur moved through the room. Araminta's voice cooled. Miss Bellinger, wit will not alter evidence, nor will solemnity make it true. Stephen's mouth moved by a fraction. Anthony stepped closer to the table. No one wishes to attack you. Then perhaps someone should explain why papers supposedly written by me are being shown to rooms in which I am not present. He lifted the top sheet, because the letters raise questions. Copies? Clementina asked. Anthony paused. Yes. Where are the originals secure? With whom? That is not relevant. It is if you wish me to answer for them. Araminta said, If they are false, why should you fear them? Clementina looked at her. Because falsehood becomes powerful when respectable people repeat it without examining who benefits. The room went silent again. Anthony unfolded the first page. This letter speaks of meetings with an unnamed gentleman before and during your courtship with his grace. Does it name me? The handwriting is represented as yours. That was not my question. His jaw tightened. No, not by full name. Does it name the gentleman? No. Then whoever wrote it valued secrecy more than clarity. Araminta gave a brittle laugh. You cannot dismiss everything by asking questions. I am beginning to think questions are exactly what some people hoped I would never ask. Stephen moved then, not toward the table, but to Clementina's side. He stopped at a respectful distance. Araminta looked at him. Stephen, surely you have something to say. I do. His voice was calm enough to command more attention than anger would have. Miss Bellinger did not refuse me. Araminta lifted her chin. No one said she did. London has said many versions of it. He looked around the room. I stopped the ceremony. I did so because she was afraid, because I saw blood on her glove from the prayer book clasp cutting her palm, and because I would rather suffer every foolish rumor in London than accept a vow given under coercion. Anthony's expression altered, only slightly. Clementina saw it. Stephen continued. That decision was mine. Araminta's face hardened. You cannot know she was coerced. Stephen looked at her. I heard a man tell her to answer when she could not speak. Anthony said, I encouraged my cousin. You may call it what you like. Stephen's tone remained level. I heard it. Clementina felt every gaze return to Anthony. He did not falter. Instead, he placed the copied pages on the table. Then, perhaps Miss Bellinger should explain these. Clementina stepped forward before Stephen could say anything. She looked down at the first copy. The language was careful, intimate without names, secretive without specifics. It spoke of longing, hidden meetings, and a future impossible to claim openly. Whoever had composed it understood exactly how much ambiguity society needed to invent the rest. Clementina read a second extract, then a third. A phrase caught her eye, for the good of everyone concerned. Her breathing slowed. She had read almost the same words in Anthony's threat. Stephen noticed the change in her face. What is it? He asked. Clementina did not answer immediately. Her eyes had moved lower on the page. There, near the bottom, was a reference to a meeting at a London assembly. A date followed. April 3rd. The room around her seemed to disappear. She saw instead a Hampshire road, a guest room at Hartwell Lodge, Mrs. Ellison's widowed sister resting upstairs, and a carriage account paid before their return to London. April 3rd. She had not been in London at all. Anthony reached for the page. Clementina let him take it. Not because she had missed the clue, but because she no longer feared losing it. She had seen enough. Araminta asked. Well? Clementina lifted her eyes. If I wished to trap a duke, why would I be the woman who let him stop the wedding? No one answered. The silence that followed was not like the chapel. There, Clementina had been unable to speak. Here, Everyone else was. Anthony gathered the papers. "There is more evidence," Stephen said. "Then produce it. In time." Clementina looked at him. "No, you do not get to frighten me with evidence I am forbidden to examine." Anthony's composure slipped by a fraction. "You forget yourself. I am beginning to think I remembered everyone else for too long." Araminta stared at her. Stephen said nothing. He let the words belong to Clementina. Anthony placed the bundle back beneath the silver paperweight. "You will have an opportunity to answer properly." Clementina held his gaze. "I already have." Then she looked once more at the hidden date she could no longer see beneath the folded pages. April 3rd. Anthony believed he had brought proof into the room. He did not yet know he had brought the first lie Clementina could prove. By the morning of June 25th, the letters had begun to travel faster than truth. They were not yet printed in full. That would have required more courage than their owners possessed. Instead, selected passages moved from breakfast room to drawing room, from folded note to whispered confidence, each repetition adding certainty where evidence was absent. Clementina learned this from Mr. Halford, who arrived at her London residence shortly before noon with 3 copied extracts and a face that revealed nothing useful. Mrs. Ellison sat near the window. Stephen stood beside the mantel. The forged love letter bundle itself was still in Araminta's possession. Only copies had reached Mr. Halford. He laid them on the table. "These are not originals," he said. "I cannot certify handwriting, paper, ink, seals, or provenance. I can tell you only that these are accurate transcriptions of passages currently being shown." Clementina looked at the pages. "Then we begin with what can be known." Stephen's gaze moved to her face. He had heard her use that phrase before. Mr. Halford placed the first copy closer. Clementina read it slowly. The supposed writer spoke of secrecy, longing, and a future that could not be claimed openly. No gentleman was named. No location was described precisely. Whoever had invented the words had been careful to make them difficult to disprove. The second extract was similar. The third was not. Clementina stopped. "Read that date again," she said. Mr. Halford looked down. "April 3rd, and the place?" "A London assembly." Mrs. Ellison straightened. Clementina did not look at her. She read the line once more. The writer claimed to have met the unnamed gentleman after the assembly in a passage near the supper room. Clementina set the page down. "I was not in London on April 3rd. Stephen's attention sharpened. "You are certain?" She looked at him. "Entirely." Mrs. Ellison spoke from the window. "We were at Hartwell Lodge in Hampshire." Mr. Halford turned toward her. "For how long?" "From April 2nd through the 5th. "Why?" Clementina answered. "Mrs. Ellison's widowed sister had been unwell. We stayed several days." "Who can confirm it?" "Her sister." "The household." "There was a guest book," Mrs. Ellison added, "and a carriage account. We paid for the journey and the change of horses." Mr. Halford wrote nothing at first. He looked at Clementina. "This is important. It proves the letter is false. It proves the claim that you attended a London assembly on April 3rd is false. That distinction matters." Clementina nodded. "Yes." She had learned to value distinctions because lies often depended on people becoming careless with them. Stephen moved closer to the table. "It also means whoever composed the letter did not know where she was." "Perhaps," Mr. Halford said, "or knew and assumed no one would check." Clementina looked again at the copied passage. The violation of it reached her more slowly than anger. Someone had not merely imitated her handwriting or invented a secret meeting. Someone had created an entire emotional life for her and expected London to prefer it to the real one. A hidden man, hidden longing, hidden betrayal, a false heart made more believable than her actual voice. She looked at the second extract. A phrase caught her eye. For the good of everyone concerned. Stephen saw where she was looking, the threatening note. Yes. Mr. Halford leaned closer. You are certain the phrase appears there? Stephen answered. It does, Clementina added. Anthony also used similar language when he spoke to me before the wedding. Mr. Halford held up one hand. Similarity is a thread, not proof. I know. Clementina touched the edge of the paper with one finger. But threads may lead somewhere. Stephen looked at her. I believe you. The words came so quickly that she turned toward him. Without seeing the originals, yes. Without examining the handwriting, yes. Why? His answer was quiet. Because I know the facts I have already seen. You had every opportunity to secure the marriage by remaining silent, and you did not. You asked for truth when a lie would have protected you, and because I watched you stand in that drawing room yesterday, while Anthony tried to make you afraid of papers he would not let you examine. Clementina held his gaze. The old version of herself might have lowered her eyes. She did not. Mr. Halford gathered the copies into order. There is another matter. Stephen's face changed before he spoke. Clementina noticed. It was slight, but she had begun to understand the ways he became still when he was deciding whether to say too much. What matter? She asked. Mr. Halford looked at Stephen. That was enough. Clementina's attention sharpened. What do you know? Stephen answered too slowly. Very little. That was not my question. Mrs. Ellison lowered her sewing. Mr. Halford said nothing. Stephen looked at Clementina. The senior clerk, who handled much of the Bellinger correspondence, has left his usual lodgings. Clementina went still. When? 2 nights ago. Why? We do not know. Who told you? Mr. Halford's inquiry reached his landlady. Clementina looked toward the solicitor, and, Mr. Halford answered. She said, a man connected to the Bellinger office, called there the previous evening. She could not identify him. Did he threaten the clerk? We do not know. We do not know. Bribe him? Then what do we know? Stephen moved a step closer, that someone may be frightened, that Anthony has already asked whether old delivery records have been requested, that forged letters are circulating, and that I will not have you become the next person he attempts to silence. The room changed. Clementina felt it before she understood why. What does that mean? Stephen's jaw tightened. It means you will remain here for the present. Silence fell. Mr. Halford looked down at the pages. Mrs. Ellison's hands became still. Clementina stared at Stephen. Remain here, yes, while you investigate, yes, and while you decide what I am permitted to know. That is not what I said. No, it is what you have done. His expression hardened with frustration. Clementina, there may be danger we do not yet understand. Then tell me everything you know. I have, after I forced the question. Stephen exhaled slowly. I was trying to protect you. By deciding what I should know. By preventing you from becoming exposed to a threat before we know its shape. Clementina looked at him for a long moment. The memory of the chapel returned without warning. Not the fear, the command, answer. One word, spoken by another man who had believed urgency, gave him authority over her. Stephen was not Anthony. She knew that. He had stopped the ceremony. He had asked permission before touching her hand, before reading the note, before keeping it. But the danger of power was not only cruelty. Sometimes it arrived as certainty dressed in care. You stopped a wedding because I had no choice, she said. Stephen went still. Clementina. Do not now ask me to thank you for choosing the rest of my life without me." His face changed. The words hurt him. She saw it. She did not withdraw them. "That is not fair," he said quietly. "Perhaps not. Anthony threatened you. I am trying to keep you safe." Then do not repeat his method in a gentler voice. The silence became absolute. Stephen looked as though she had struck some hidden truth inside him. Clementina continued, her voice calm. "If the clerk is frightened, I may remember something useful. If the letters are false, let me examine them. If Anthony is moving against witnesses, then I am already part of the danger, whether you place me in this house or not. I do not want to lose you." The words came before he could stop them. Something tightened in Clementina's chest. For one dangerous second, tenderness nearly softened the argument. She refused to let it erase the point. "Then trust me enough to let me stand in my own life." Stephen lowered his eyes. He had no answer ready. Clementina turned back to the copied letters. April 3rd, Hartwell Lodge, the carriage account, the guest book. Facts. She thought of the senior clerk, a middle-aged man who had spent years recording things Anthony called unnecessary. Arrival times, messenger names, oral instructions. Details respectable men preferred not to remember. Then a precise memory surfaced. Anthony once mocking the clerk for writing delivery times in the margins of the correspondence book. Clementina looked up. The clerk recorded messenger arrivals. Mr. Halford leaned forward. "You are certain?" "Yes." Anthony hated it. He said no gentleman needed to know whether a letter arrived at 11 or 11:15. Stephen's attention sharpened. Clementina looked at him. "If your June 7th letter passed through that office, there may be a record of exactly when it arrived." Stephen did not answer at once. The room held the last sentence between them. If his June 7th letter had passed through the Bellinger office, there might be a record of when it arrived. A small detail, a margin entry, the sort of thing Anthony had dismissed, because he believed careful men recorded too much and quiet women asked too little. Mr. Halford looked at Clementina with sudden focus. Who kept the correspondence book? The senior clerk. "And you believe he noted delivery times?" "I know he did." Stephen's gaze remained on her, but the hard certainty had gone out of it. What remained was worse for him and better for her. Recognition. "Then we find him," he said. Clementina looked at him. "We?" He understood the question immediately. "Yes." A pause. "If you still wish me involved?" She had expected an explanation, perhaps a defense. Instead, he gave her the choice he should have given before. Clementina said nothing. Stephen stepped away from the mantel. "I was wrong." Mr. Halford became very still. Mrs. Ellison lowered her eyes. Stephen continued before anyone could soften the moment for him. "I saw danger and decided that fear gave me authority." It did not. Clementina watched his face. "You thought you were protecting me." "Yes. That does not make the choice harmless." "No." His answer came without hesitation. "And you withheld information." "Yes." "What information?" "Everything I know." Clementina looked at Mr. Halford. "And Anthony? He has asked whether anyone requested old delivery records," the solicitor said. "Twice." Clementina turned back to Stephen. "You knew all this before I asked?" "Yes." "And you meant to tell me when?" His jaw tightened. "When I knew enough to tell you something useful." "You mean when you had decided what was safe?" "Yes." There was no excuse in the word. That mattered more than she wanted it to. Stephen drew one breath. "I will not repeat the mistake." Clementina studied him. "You cannot promise never to fail. No, only what you do after." His expression changed. "Then I promise not to hide behind good intentions when I do." Something in her chest eased, though trust did not return because of one sentence. It returned by being offered truth and seeing whether the offer held. Mr. Halford opened his case. If Miss Bellinger is willing, we should act quickly. Clementina sat. Stephen waited until she did, then took the chair opposite. The correction was small. She noticed it. The clerk may not trust a solicitor, Mr. Halford said. He may trust me, Clementina answered. Stephen's attention sharpened. Why? She looked at the blank sheet before her. Because Anthony once accused a junior office servant of losing a receipt. The clerk found it later inside the wrong ledger. Before he did, Anthony intended to dismiss the boy. And you stopped him? Stephen asked. I asked whether one missing paper was worth destroying a man's livelihood without proof. Mrs. Ellison smiled faintly. Clementina continued. The clerk remembered. Mr. Halford pushed paper and ink toward her. Then write. Stephen did not read over her shoulder. Clementina noticed that too. She wrote slowly. She did not promise protection she could not guarantee. She did not accuse Anthony. She told the clerk only what was necessary. A private letter written to her by the Duke on June 7th had never reached her. Questions had arisen concerning correspondence and accounts. If the clerk had knowledge, she would hear facts without punishing honesty. Then she added one final line. You once told me that a record matters because memory can be frightened into silence. If you kept a record, I am ready to hear it. She folded the letter. How will it reach him? Mr. Halford said. Through a clerk of mine who knows a man the senior clerk trusts. No Bellinger servant will carry it. Good. Stephen looked at Clementina. What do you want me to do? It was the first time since the argument that he asked so plainly. Clementina thought before answering. Nothing tonight. He gave the slightest nod. That may be the most difficult instruction I have received. Then consider it useful practice. His mouth moved at one corner. The reply came the following afternoon, June 27th. The senior clerk had not left London. He had abandoned his usual lodging because Anthony's inquiries frightened him. He would meet only if Clementina was present, with Mr. Halford and Mrs. Ellison, and if no one from the Bellinger household knew the place. Stephen read the conditions once. Then he handed the note to Clementina. What do you choose? I go. He did not argue. The meeting took place the next morning in a private room at Mr. Halford's chambers. The senior clerk arrived pale, exhausted, and dressed with the precise care of a man trying not to look hunted. He carried no visible papers. His first glance went to Clementina. Miss Bellinger, you received my letter? Yes. Then tell me only what you know, not what you suspect. Relief crossed his face. He sat. Stephen remained near the wall, far enough back that his rank did not dominate the table. Mrs. Ellison sat beside Clementina. Mr. Halford opened a notebook. The clerk clasped his hands. The Duke's letter arrived on June 7th. No one moved. Clementina felt her heartbeat change. How do you know? She asked. I entered it in the correspondence register, 11:10 in the morning. Stephen closed his eyes for half a second. Clementina kept her gaze on the clerk. What happened then? Mr. Bellinger saw the seal before the letter could be forwarded to you. Did you see him open it? No. Then do not say he did. The clerk nodded. I did not see him open it. I saw him take it. And later, he returned it to me and ordered it destroyed. Stephen's hands tightened at his sides. Clementina asked, Did you destroy it? The clerk looked at her. No. Silence filled the room. Why not? Because it was private correspondence addressed to you. Because your father once trusted me with his books, and because by then I had begun to question other instructions Mr. Bellinger gave. Mr. Halford leaned forward. Financial instructions? Yes. What kind? Transfers from income assigned for Miss Bellinger's benefit. Descriptions that did not match the purpose I was told orally. Clementina's voice remained steady. Where is the letter now? In a locked drawer at the Bellinger office, hidden behind old account folios. Mr. Halford's expression sharpened. And Anthony does not know? No, you are certain? As certain as a frightened man can be. Clementina looked at him. You said there were other instructions. The clerk hesitated. Then he reached inside his coat and removed nothing. Instead, he touched the inner pocket as if reminding himself of something absent. There was also a draft. Stephen's attention shifted. What draft? Mr. Bellinger dictated language for what he called a private family matter. Phrases about secrecy, meetings, and acting for the good of everyone concerned. He instructed that the wording be copied again in a more delicate hand. Clementina felt the words strike one after another. Did you see my name? No. Did you see the final letters? No. Then what did you see? One discarded draft page. Mr. Bellinger ordered it destroyed. Mr. Halford said, Did you? The clerk looked at him. No. Clementina's breath caught. Where is it? Hidden with the Duke's letter. The room went completely still. The clerk looked at Clementina, then at Stephen. The letter is intact, swallowed. And it isn't the only thing I kept. By late afternoon on June 28th, the truth had begun to acquire weight. Not certainty. Not yet, but weight enough to be carried in leather, locked in drawers, and placed before witnesses who could no longer dismiss it as a woman's distress. Mr. Halford arranged the recovery with care. The senior Bellinger clerk still possessed lawful access to the correspondence room and account records he had managed for years. He did not search Anthony's private desk or take papers unrelated to Clementina's affairs. He returned to the Bellinger office, accompanied by Mr. Halford and one of the solicitor's own clerks, and he identified only the specific items he had already described. Clementina did not go with them. She had chosen the investigation. But she would not hand Anthony an easy accusation that she had entered his office and taken whatever suited her story. Instead, she waited at Mr. Halford's chambers with Mrs. Ellison and Stephen. No one tried to distract her. That was a mercy. Stephen stood near the window for much of the time, speaking only when she did. Once, Clementina caught him looking at her right hand, where the cut had faded to a narrow healing line. He looked away before concern could become intrusion. The hours passed slowly. At last, the outer door opened. Mr. Halford entered first, carrying a narrow leather folio. Behind him came the senior clerk with a thick account book bound in dark calfskin. Another clerk followed with a small packet of certified notes concerning the correspondence register. Clementina rose. You found them. Mr. Halford placed the folio on the table. We found what he told us was there. Stephen did not move closer until Clementina did. She noticed that. The senior clerk set down the account book with both hands. This is the volume containing the entries I mentioned. Clementina looked at it, then at the folio. And the letter? Mr. Halford opened the case and withdrew a folded sheet. The red wax seal was broken, but the impression of the Massingham crest remained visible. Stephen went still. That is mine. His voice was low. The senior clerk nodded. It arrived on June 7th at 11:10 in the morning. The register entry remains. We have had it copied and certified. Clementina looked at the letter. For 3 weeks, its existence had depended on Stephen's word and the clerk's memory. Now it lay before her. Intact. Real. a freedom that had crossed London and been stopped before it reached her. "May I read it?" she asked. Stephen looked at her. "It was written to you." Mr. Halford handed it across the table. Clementina unfolded the page. Stephen's handwriting was firm, controlled, unmistakable. There was no declaration written for effect, no romance meant to flatter, only clarity. He had written that she had seemed troubled during their last conversation. He had written that no wedding should proceed merely because arrangements had become inconvenient to alter. If she wished to postpone, he would accept the public consequences himself. If she wished to refuse entirely, he would not blame her. She reached the final line and read it twice. Then she folded the sheet carefully. "You meant this." Stephen's expression did not change, but something in his eyes did. Every word. Even before the wedding, especially before it. Clementina placed the letter back on the table. Mr. Halford received it and returned it to the folio. From that moment, the original June 7th letter remained in his custody. Then the senior clerk opened the account book. Several entries had been marked with narrow slips of paper. Mr. Halford pointed to the dates. "These are the sums, Mr. Bellinger represented to you as payments connected to your late father's debts. Yes, here, however, they are drawn from income assigned for your benefit." Clementina leaned closer. "And the descriptions? They do not match the creditors named to you. They move through Bellinger administration expenses and private advances." Stephen's face hardened. "How much is irregular?" "Enough to require formal accounting. Not enough yet for me to give you a final figure." Clementina nodded. "Then do not." Mr. Halford glanced at her. "I had no intention of doing so." "Good." The clerk turned another page. These were entries I questioned. "Did Anthony answer?" Clementina asked. "He said the descriptions were sufficient." "And you believed him?" The clerk hesitated, at first, and later I began keeping separate notes. Mr. Halford closed the account book halfway. "Those notes are useful, but the book itself matters more." He looked at Clementina. "Because Mr. Bellinger's authority over these funds is delegated rather than absolute. The proper legal authority, overseeing your trust arrangements, can suspend his access once the irregularities are documented. That suspension is not a final judgment. The formal accounting will still take time, but he can be stopped from moving more money." "Yes." Clementina let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The clerk then reached toward the folio. "There is one more paper." Mr. Halford removed a single draft page. It was rougher than the others, marked by crossings out and additions. Clementina saw the phrase immediately, "for the good of everyone concerned." Lower on the page were lines about secrecy, a meeting, and a loyalty misunderstood by others. At the margin, in a different hand, stood a brief instruction. "Have this copied in a more delicate hand." Stephen leaned closer. "Whose writing is that?" The senior clerk answered. "Mr. Anthony Bellinger's." Clementina looked at him. "You are certain?" "I have seen his hand for more than 20 years. "Did you see him write those words?" "No." "Then say only what you know." The clerk nodded. "I know the handwriting. I know he dictated the draft. I know he ordered me to destroy it. I know I did not." Mr. Halford looked at Clementina. "This does not alone prove who made the final fair copies, but it creates a direct link between Mr. Bellinger and language later appearing in the forged letters." "And Araminta said before witnesses that Anthony personally gave her the bundle," Clementina said. "Yes." The evidence no longer formed a cloud. It had begun to form a chain, not complete, but stronger with every link. 2 days later, on June 30th, Mr. Halford added another piece. A message had returned from Hartwell Lodge. The guest book confirmed that Miss Clementina Bellinger and Mrs. Ellison had stayed there from April 2nd through April 5th. A carriage account supported the same journey. The forged letters claim that Clementina attended a London assembly on April 3rd was false. Clementina stood at the window of her London residence as Mr. Halford finished speaking. "Then we have enough to act privately," Stephen said. She turned. "Privately? Halford can move against Anthony's financial authority. We can challenge the letters. We do not need another public spectacle." Clementina looked at him for a long moment. He had not ordered. He had proposed. That difference mattered. The accusation was public. Stephen said nothing. "They called me mad in print. They invented a lover. Araminta questioned me before witnesses. Anthony placed false letters on a table and expected me to defend myself without access to the originals. What do you want?" Stephen asked. No caution, no hidden answer inside the question. Clementina looked at the evidence Mr. Halford had brought, the letter that had once offered freedom, the account book that showed money leaving under false descriptions. The draft Anthony believed destroyed. "I want the truth told where the lie was believed." Mr. Halford's expression sharpened. "That carries risk. I know. Anthony may refuse to attend. Then he refuses before witnesses. Araminta may attempt to control the room. Then we decide the conditions before I enter it." Stephen watched her. "Where?" Clementina knew the answer. "Hedden House." Mrs. Ellison drew breath. Mr. Halford looked doubtful. Stephen did not. "Why there?" "Because that is where they expected me to break." The room became still. Then Clementina continued, "I will attend only if you do, Mr. Halford. The senior clerk must be admitted. Mrs. Ellison remains with me. The same principal witnesses who heard the accusation should be present, and the forged bundle must be available for examination." Mr. Halford nodded slowly. "Reasonable?" Stephen asked. "And if Araminta refuses, then society will ask why a woman so certain of her accusation fears the people who contest it." Something like pride moved through Stephen's face, but he did not claim the moment. "What role do you want me to play?" Clementina looked at him. Once, he would have decided that himself. Now, he asked. "Keep the evidence safe," she said. "Let me ask the questions." Stephen held her gaze. "Done." By evening, Araminta's answer arrived. She accepted the conditions, whether from arrogance, calculation, or fear of appearing afraid. Clementina did not know. It did not matter. Anthony still believed the drawing room belonged to him. This time, Clementina intended to make him answer. On July 2nd, Hedden House received its guests under a grey London sky, and the pretense that everyone had come for conversation. No music had been arranged this time. No soprano waited near the pianoforte. No servant carried a printed program through the room. The people present had been chosen because they had heard the earlier accusations, repeated them, believed them, or watched in silence while Clementina was asked to defend herself against papers she was not allowed to examine. Mrs. Ellison stood beside her. Mr. Halford waited near a writing desk with a locked leather case. The senior Bellinger clerk stood close to him, pale but composed. Stephen remained to Clementina's right, not before her. Before entering the house, he had transferred the original threatening note from his secured custody to Mr. Halford, who now held it with the original June 7th letter. The Bellinger Trust account, book, the preserved dictated draft, the certified correspondence entry, and the records obtained from Hartwell Lodge. The forged love letter bundle alone remained in Araminta's possession. Because Clementina had insisted that the false evidence be produced by the woman who had used it. Lady Araminta entered last with Anthony beside her. She wore silver-grey silk and an expression of injured dignity. Anthony looked almost untouched by the previous weeks. That was his talent. Respectability had always been his first disguise. Araminta stopped before Clementina. "Miss Bellinger, I had hoped you would come prepared to acknowledge the damage your conduct has caused." Clementina met her gaze. "I have come prepared to acknowledge damage." Araminta's expression softened with satisfaction. "Then perhaps we may finally speak sensibly." "Yes." Clementina turned toward Anthony. "Let us begin with the first lie." The room went silent. Anthony gave a faint sigh. "Clementina, this performance will not improve your position." "Then you should have no difficulty answering my questions." "I am not on trial." "No. You are in the same drawing room where you placed accusations before witnesses. Today, those witnesses will hear your answers." Anthony's mouth tightened. Clementina looked toward Araminta. "The letters, please." Araminta did not move. "You have already denied them." "I asked for the letters." Araminta glanced at Stephen. He said nothing. He had promised Clementina the questions would be hers. After a long pause, Araminta went to a side table and lifted the bundle from beneath a silver paperweight. "Mr. Bellinger gave these to me himself." "Yes," Clementina said. "You stated that before witnesses 8 days ago." Anthony looked at Araminta. It was brief, Mr. Halford noticed. So did Clementina. Araminta placed the bundle on the table. Clementina did not touch it. "One letter says I met an unnamed gentleman after a London assembly on April 3rd. Anthony answered, "So it does. I was not in London. You claim that now." Clementina turned to Mr. Halford. He opened the case and produced 2 certified records. Miss Bellinger and Mrs. Ellison were entered as guests at Hartwell Lodge in Hampshire from April 2nd through April 5th. A carriage account confirms the same journey. Mrs. Ellison said, "I was with her throughout the visit." Anthony shrugged. "Records may be mistaken." "Certainly," Clementina said. "One record may be mistaken. Perhaps 2. Perhaps Mrs. Ellison's memory as well. So let us continue." She looked at him. "Why does a phrase in these supposed love letters match the note given to me before the wedding?" His face did not change. "A common phrase proves nothing." "Agreed." She nodded to Mr. Halford. He withdrew the original threatening note, unfolded it carefully, and displayed the relevant line. "For the good of everyone concerned." Clementina looked at Anthony. "The same phrase appears in a document you gave me on the morning of the wedding and in letters you later gave Lady Araminta. You have not proved I wrote either." "No." Clementina's voice remained calm. "That is why there is more." Mr. Halford produced the preserved draft. The senior clerk swallowed, then stepped forward. Clementina turned to him. "Tell them only what you personally know." Mr. Anthony Bellinger dictated language for what he called a private family matter. I recorded the wording. He later ordered the page destroyed. "Did you destroy it?" "No." "Why not?" By then I had begun questioning other instructions he gave. Clementina looked at the draft. "What appears in the margin?" the clerk answered. "An instruction in Mr. Bellinger's handwriting. It says the text should be copied in a more delicate hand." Anthony stepped forward. "This is absurd." Stephen moved once. "Only half a step. You will let her finish." His voice never rose. He said nothing else and stepped back. Clementina looked at Anthony. The silence had changed sides. "Did you dictate this draft?" "No." "Did you write the marginal instruction?" "No." "Did you give the forged bundle to Lady Araminta?" Araminta answered before him. He gave it to me. Anthony turned sharply toward her. Clementina continued. Then we have a false letter placing me in London when I was in Hampshire. We have language from that letter appearing in a draft. Your clerk says you dictated. We have your written instruction to have the text copied in a more delicate hand, and we have Lady Araminta confirming that you personally delivered the finished bundle. Anthony looked around the room. You are all allowing a frightened clerk and a disgraced woman to construct a conspiracy from scraps. Clementina did not flinch. Then perhaps the next question will help. Mr. Halford produced the original June 7th letter. Stephen's red seal remained broken but visible. Clementina looked at Anthony. His Grace wrote this 1 week before the wedding. It told me I was free to postpone or refuse the marriage without blame. Why did I never receive it? How should I know? Clementina turned to the clerk. What happened when it arrived? I entered it in the correspondence register at 11:10 in the morning. Mr. Bellinger saw the seal and took the letter before it could be forwarded to Miss Bellinger. Anthony said, Lies. The clerk's face went pale, but he continued. Later, he returned it to me and ordered it destroyed. Mr. Halford placed the certified correspondence entry beside the original letter. Anthony stared at the page. Clementina asked, Why did you order a private letter addressed to me destroyed? I did no such thing. Then why was it hidden in the office drawer where the clerk said he had preserved it? Because he placed it there. Yes, Clementina said. After you told him to destroy it. Anthony's composure cracked. You cannot prove what was said in private. No, but I can show the letter existed. I can show when it arrived. I can show I never received it. And I can show you controlled the correspondence channel through which it passed. She let the silence remain. Then she turned to the account book. Now the money. Mr. Halford opened the marked volume. Clementina looked at Anthony. You told me funds were being used to settle my father's debts. They were. Then why do these entries show money taken from income assigned for my benefit under descriptions that do not match the creditors you named? Because accounts are complicated, and I am too ignorant to understand them. I did not say that. You said it often enough without the words. Anthony looked at Stephen. Your Grace, surely you see what this has become. Stephen's face was unreadable. I see a woman asking questions you have not answered. Clementina continued. Mr. Halford, the solicitor, spoke. The account book shows repeated withdrawals requiring formal examination. Mr. Bellinger's authority over these funds is delegated, not absolute. The proper legal authority overseeing Miss Bellinger's trust arrangements has approved immediate suspension of his practical access while the accounting proceeds. Relevant banks and account custodians are being notified. Anthony's face lost color. You cannot do this, Mr. Halford answered. It is already being done. No one spoke. Clementina looked at her cousin. For years, Anthony had taught her that silence was refinement. Questions were vulgar, and ignorance was protection. He had used her father's name, her money, her marriage, and even an invented lover because he believed she would remain too ashamed to challenge him. You told me silence was dignity, she said. Anthony's eyes met hers. Clementina. No. Her voice was quiet. It was merely useful to you. The sentence settled over the room. Anthony had no answer. Only then did Stephen speak. I stopped the wedding because Miss Bellinger's consent mattered more than my reputation. I will not permit anyone to call that madness, betrayal, or weakness. Araminta had gone pale. Stephen turned to her. You repeated accusations without proof and gave them the authority of this house. You will send written retractions to every household where those claims were circulated. Araminta stared at him. Stephen, you cannot command society. No, I can command my patronage. Until the correction is complete, Heddon House will receive none of it. She understood. So did everyone else. Mr. Halford closed the account book, the forged bundle, threatening note, June 7th letter, preserved draft, and supporting records would return to his custody. Anthony's financial authority was suspended. The formal accounting had begun. No instant conviction, no theatrical destruction, only consequences that could no longer be talked away. Later, after the witnesses had gone, and Mrs. Ellison waited nearby, Stephen found Clementina beside the drawing-room window. He did not ask whether she was grateful. He did not ask whether public vindication had changed what she felt for him. He only said, "What do you choose now?" Clementina looked at him. The man who had once protected her by deciding too much was finally standing still enough to receive an answer he could not control. "Ask me tomorrow," she said. His eyes held hers. Tomorrow, without witnesses. For the first time that day, Stephen smiled. It was small, almost disbelieving. Tomorrow, then, the next morning, July 3rd, Stephen kept his promise. He came to Clementina's London residence shortly after 10, not in a ducal carriage crowded with servants, but quietly, with only the attendance propriety required. Mrs. Ellison received him, and then settled at the far end of the small garden beneath a striped awning, near enough to satisfy convention and far enough to grant them privacy. Clementina was already waiting beside a lime tree. The morning was warm, and the city beyond the garden walls seemed strangely distant. Yesterday, in a crowded drawing room, men and women had watched Anthony lose control of the story he had built around her. Today, there were no witnesses waiting for a triumph, no false letters on a table, no account book, no threatening note. All of those remained in Mr. Halford's custody, where evidence belonged. What stood between Clementina and Stephen now required no documents. He stopped, several feet from her. "You asked me to ask today." "I did. Then I will." His voice was calm, but she saw the uncertainty beneath it. That mattered. A man who had once trusted certainty too much was allowing himself to stand without it. He drew one breath. "Do you wish me to ask for your future now?" Clementina looked at him. The answer was not fear. It was not no. It was simply not ready. Not yet. Stephen's expression changed, but only with the brief pain of a hope checked. He did not argue. He did not ask how long. He did not say he had earned an answer by stopping the wedding, believing her, or standing beside her in Heddon House. He inclined his head. Then not yet. Clementina studied him. That is all. What else should there be? Disappointment. There is some. His honesty almost made her smile. Persuasion. No, a reminder of what you have endured together. That would make your suffering a debt owed to me. He shook his head. I don't want that. Something inside her eased, and if I never become ready, his gaze held hers. Then I will regret it, but I will not make your freedom the price of my regret. Clementina looked away toward the stone wall where summer ivy climbed in orderly green. She had thought the hardest part would be learning to speak. Perhaps it was harder to discover that another person could hear an answer he did not want and still leave it untouched. Stephen said nothing more. He waited until she looked back at him. "What happens now?" she asked. "Whatever you choose next. You are becoming very irritating. I have been called worse." Recently? Yesterday by Anthony's expression. This time she smiled. The silence between them softened. Over the next 12 days, truth continued its slower work. Lady Araminta's written retractions began to reach the same houses where her insinuations had travelled. They did not say Clementina had merely been misunderstood. Mr. Halford had insisted upon precision. The accusation of madness was withdrawn. The suggestion of a secret lover was withdrawn. The forged letters were acknowledged as false. Anthony's practical authority over Clementina's financial affairs remained suspended while the formal accounting proceeded, and the relevant banks and account custodians had been notified. No one pretended that every consequence could be completed in a fortnight. Real disgrace was slower than gossip. So was justice. Clementina preferred it that way. She returned invitations only when she wished. She declined several without apology. She received others. She spoke to no one about Anthony, unless necessary. She had spent too long living inside explanations designed by other people. She would not build another prison by making him the subject of every room she entered. On July 15th, she asked Mrs. Ellison to prepare for a journey. "Where are we going?" the older woman asked, though her eyes already knew. "Whitebarrow." Mrs. Ellison smiled. "For how long?" Clementina looked down at the ivory-bound prayer book resting on the table before her. A London craftsman had repaired the old clasp. It opened smoothly now and closed without catching. There was no folded threat inside. "I haven't decided." Mrs. Ellison's smile deepened. "Good." They left London early on July 16th. The journey took most of the day, with changes of horses and proper stops along the road. Clementina travelled with Mrs. Ellison and attendants. The prayer book remained in her own travelling case. Stephen had gone ahead separately and made no public spectacle of her return. By the time Whitebarrow House came into view, the afternoon light had turned warm against the stone. Clementina looked through the carriage window at the house where she had once prepared to marry under threat. She did not feel the same fear. Nor did she feel the need to deny that fear had existed. Both truths could live together. Whitebarrow had witnessed the worst silence of her life. It might yet witness something else. Stephen received her at the entrance, but did not reach for her hand until she offered it. The gesture was brief, proper, yet the warmth of his fingers remained after he let go. "You came." "I had noticed. I was trying not to sound surprised." "You failed, completely." She looked at him. "Walk with me." They went into the east garden before the household could draw them into formality. Mrs. Ellison remained visible on the terrace. Clementina carried the repaired prayer book in one hand. The chapel roof could be seen beyond the trees, but Stephen did not look toward it. They stopped beside a stone bench beneath the beech tree. "Yesterday," Clementina said, "I told Mrs. Ellison I had not decided how long I would remain." Stephen nodded. "You owe me no schedule. You really have become irritating." "So you said." She looked down at the prayer book. "Ask me now." He did not move. For one moment, the composure left his face entirely. "Are you certain?" "No." His brows drew together. Clementina's mouth softened. "But I am choosing." He understood. She saw it happen. Stephen drew one careful breath. "Then I will ask." He stepped no closer. "Would you choose a life with me, knowing exactly who I am? Knowing I can be too certain, too controlling, and too quick to mistake protection for authority? Knowing I failed you once after the chapel, and may fail in smaller ways again because I am human?" Clementina held his gaze. He continued. "And knowing that you owe me nothing, not gratitude because I stopped the wedding, not loyalty because I believed you, not marriage because I stood beside you, nothing." The garden seemed very quiet. Clementina looked at the man who had stopped a ceremony when she could not speak. then later wounded her by trying to decide too much for her. The second truth did not erase the first. The first did not excuse the second. That was why her answer mattered. "I loved the man who stopped the wedding," she said. Stephen went still. "But I did not know whether I could trust a life with him." He said nothing. "Then you made your mistake." "A memorable one." "Very." His mouth almost moved. Clementina continued. "And you admitted it. Without asking me to make your intention more important than what you had done. That is when I began to trust the man I might marry." Stephen's eyes closed for the briefest instant. When he opened them, the emotion in them was unguarded. "Then what do you choose?" "You." He did not breathe. Clementina lifted one eyebrow. "You may react." A quiet laugh escaped him. "I was trying not to frighten the answer away." "It is mine, you cannot frighten it away." "Then, yes? Yes, entirely? By choice?" "Entirely." Later that afternoon, in the same private chapel where silence had once stopped everything. Clementina stood beside Stephen again. The priest was the same. Mrs. Ellison was present. Only a small number of proper witnesses attended. There were no curious guests waiting for a spectacle. No Anthony in the pews, no Araminta preparing an explanation. Clementina held the repaired ivory prayer book in both hands. Her right palm bore only the faintest trace of the old cut. The question came. This time Stephen did not watch her with fear. He waited. Clementina looked at him and said, clearly, "I will." The words moved through the chapel without trembling. Stephen closed his eyes for half a second, and when he opened them, she saw what he had refused to show before witnesses elsewhere: relief, love, gratitude without possession. The ceremony continued, and when it ended, Clementina became Duchess of Massingham because she had chosen the man beside her, not because fear had carried her to the altar. At the wedding breakfast, Mrs. Ellison cried discreetly and denied it when accused. Stephen's household received its new duchess with restrained warmth. Later, when the formalities had ended and the terrace stood quiet in the evening light, Stephen found Clementina alone for a moment with the prayer book still in her hands. "I should make you one promise," he said. "Only one? I am trying not to be excessive. A wise beginning." He stopped before coming too close. "I will not ask obedience from you." Clementina looked at him. "Good. I will ask truth, even when you dislike it, especially then." She closed the prayer book, the repaired clasp fastened with a small, clean click. No threat slipped from between the pages. No command waited inside. Clementina looked at Stephen and understood that the first ceremony had ended because she could not speak. The second had become real because, at last, the word belonged entirely to her. By October of 1817, White Barrow House had settled into the quiet rhythms of autumn, though Clementina no longer mistook quiet for emptiness. The gravel drives were the same. The private chapel still stood beyond the east garden, its stone walls unchanged by memory. The lawns had faded from summer green, and the great beech trees released their leaves one by one across the paths. Yet the life within the house had altered in ways no visitor could measure by architecture. Clementina was now Clementina, Duchess of Massingham, and 3 months had passed since the second ceremony. The title had become familiar more slowly than she expected. She could answer to it without surprise now, though she still found greater satisfaction in the simpler things it had not changed. She still read account figures twice. She still disliked vague explanations. She still preferred a difficult truth to a polished evasion. The narrow cut once left across her right palm had nearly vanished, Only under certain light could she see the faintest pale line where the clasp of her mother's ivory-bound prayer book had broken the skin. The book remained with her at Whitebarrow, its repaired clasp opened easily now. No note lay hidden between its pages. The original threatening letter, Stephen's June 7th letter, the preserved dictated draft, the forged love letter bundle, the correspondence records, and the trust account book remained in Mr. Halford's custody where evidence belonged. Clementina rarely thought about their physical location anymore. Truth no longer depended upon her carrying it in her hands. Anthony Bellinger had not escaped consequence merely because the first weeks of scandal had passed. Records that had once been dismissed as family business were now being examined line by line. Questions about diverted funds had widened. Men who had once accepted Anthony's composure as proof of integrity had become more careful about being seen beside him. His social invitations dwindled. His correspondence was answered more slowly. The respectability he had used as armor had not disappeared in a single dramatic moment. It was eroding under facts, which was slower and more exact. Lady Araminta Heddon had completed the written retractions required of her. The accusations of madness had been withdrawn. The suggestion of a secret lover had been withdrawn. The letters once shown as proof of Clementina's deceit had been acknowledged as false. Stephen had not softened the consequence because Araminta was his aunt. Heddon House no longer benefited from his patronage, and Araminta was not received at Whitebarrow. Clementina did not rejoice in her exclusion. Satisfaction had never required cruelty. It was enough that the same woman who had once stood in a drawing-room and defined Clementina before witnesses had been compelled to correct the lie in writing. The senior Bellinger clerk had also left Anthony's control. Through Mr. Halford's assistance and a legitimate recommendation from Stephen, he had accepted stable employment in a solicitor's office where precision was considered a virtue rather than an inconvenience. His first letter to Clementina after taking the position had been brief. He thanked her for trusting his account when he had been afraid. Clementina had answered him personally. She wrote that preserving one page when someone powerful ordered it destroyed was not cowardice. It was courage performed without witnesses. Mary Cole remained at Whitebarrow as well. No punishment had ever touched her for the missing letters she had not carried. The young maid still blushed whenever Clementina addressed her directly, though she no longer looked frightened when summoned. These were not matters discussed in society papers. Clementina preferred that. Justice had already had its audience. Life did not need to remain a public reckoning forever. Marriage, she discovered, was built less from great declarations than from repeated opportunities to keep promises no one applauded. Stephen was still a man accustomed to command. Years as Duke of Massingham had trained him to decide quickly, speak with certainty, and expect action to follow. That instinct had not vanished because he loved her. Clementina would not have trusted such an easy transformation. What changed was that she saw him stop himself. He asked. He listened. He revised. One October morning, they sat opposite each other in the library, with a steward's proposal spread across the table between them. The matter concerned repairs to drainage channels on a distant portion of the estate. Stephen had read the figures once and approved them in principle. Clementina had read them twice and disagreed. "No," she said. "No, no, that is alarmingly concise. The figures are alarming enough." He leaned back in his chair. "I thought the estimate reasonable." Then you thought too quickly. His brows lifted. I see marriage has destroyed your respect for rank. Your arithmetic began the work. His mouth moved despite himself. My arithmetic is excellent. Then your optimism is reckless. She turned the page and pointed to the transport costs. Stone must be brought farther than the steward allows for. The winter roads will slow the carts, and the labor estimate assumes no interruption from frost. Stephen read the figures again. He asked 3 questions. Clementina answered them. Then he took up his pen and crossed out the approval. You are right. She regarded him gravely. You said that with admirable dignity. I have had practice. Not enough. Cruel woman, almost tolerable man, his expression warmed. The phrase had survived from the garden, private between them now. He altered the instructions and handed the draft toward her. Write the questions you want sent to the steward. Clementina accepted the paper. Once, she might have guided him toward the error, gently enough that he believed he had discovered it himself. That habit belonged to another life. She no longer protected powerful men from the discomfort of being corrected. Stephen no longer mistook correction for rejection. The change was small enough that society would never notice. Clementina valued it more than any grand gesture performed before witnesses. Their days gathered such moments. He asked her opinion on estate correspondence and changed his mind when her reasoning was stronger. She disagreed without apology. When he became too certain, she told him. When she retreated into silence, he did not force words from her. He waited until she chose them. Neither pretended that love had made them perfect. Love had only made truth worth the effort. One late October afternoon, Clementina carried the ivory-bound prayer book into the east garden. The air was cool enough for a shawl. Leaves lay along the gravel path, gold and copper against the dark earth. She stopped beside the stone bench beneath the old beech tree and placed the book there. The repaired clasp caught the low autumn light. Clementina opened it to a familiar page. Nothing fell out. No folded cream paper, no threat, no command telling her what one word must cost. Stephen found her there several minutes later. He approached without ceremony and sat beside her, leaving enough space that respect no longer felt like caution. For a while, neither spoke. Clementina listened to the movement of leaves overhead. Stephen looked at the open prayer book. Do you ever regret that day? He asked. She knew at once which day he meant. The first ceremony? Yes. Clementina considered the answer carefully. She no longer searched for the kindest response first. She searched for the truest one. No. Stephen turned toward her. No? I regret what Anthony did. I regret that my father's name was used against me. I regret the fear. Her fingertips rested lightly against the edge of the open page, but I do not regret that the ceremony stopped. Stephen was silent. Clementina looked at him. That was the day you stopped listening to everyone else and began listening to me. Something moved across his face. You were not speaking. Exactly, he smiled, though emotion remained beneath it. That makes the compliment rather dangerous. You noticed what my silence meant before I could explain it. She closed the prayer book partway. Later, you had to learn not to decide what my voice should mean either. A more difficult lesson. For you, certainly. Cruel woman, almost tolerable man. This time they both laughed. The sound belonged only to the garden. No witnesses waited. No drawing room leaned closer. No one needed to record what it meant. Clementina closed the prayer book fully, the repaired clasp fastened with a small, clean click. For one moment, she left it resting on the stone bench in the autumn light, empty of threats and free of hidden demands. Then she picked it up and rose. Stephen rose beside her. Together they walked back toward Whitebarrow House, not because rank required her to follow, not because gratitude required her to stay, and not because fear had driven her toward a future chosen by someone else. She walked beside him because she wished to, and beside him was exactly where he had finally learned to let her be.